Okay.
Come on.
Jonathan Stone.
Here.
Cindy Toll.
Here.
Bob Seward.
Here.
Derek Metzen.
Here.
Chair McLaughlin.
Here.
Yay, we're all here.
Okay, so I better.
Full house.
So
Yeah, do that and this should come up.
here we go. So the discussion items to start with is 14-99 Preservation Grant 1401, 1214 Washington Street.
And Jay Pierce, the gentleman who was here last month, should be here.
Was that the same?
So I have not heard that he was not going to be here.
Can we
So
proceed?
if the chair wants to proceed, I'm
Yeah,
happy.
let's proceed.
Okay. He doesn't have to be here. So.
That's what I was going to say. I don't think they have.
Okay. So this Preservation Grant 1301, just to remind the board that at the last hearing there was a request to revise the policy as a test for this year to waive the requirement that applicants who have previously received approvals for the preservation grant need to wait till January. So Mr. Pierce had received a previous preservation grant for the work he's been doing on his property, and he's coming in again. And this preservation grant is for window repair and for the replication of porch elements that needed to be repaired or are missing. So you can see from the packet that he has turned in, oops, my apologies. He has turned in 2 bids. He wants to use the A1 paint removal, painting and restoration. They're the group that is already working on his house. And if you've been up Washington Street, you'll see they've stripped the paint on the house right now. And so what he's asking is to work on the dry rot pillars, the handrailers, some molding baluster spindles, as well as working on window and sash repair. So those both items are eligible for the grant. And based on his proposal, he is eligible for the full $1,000 match.
So I did see on there that they had put some stuff on, but those contractors that he had bid didn't seem like really restoration contractors, but maybe they are. There's one that was an HVAC,
Right.
Ram Air.
Yeah, I think that's a secondary bid. It's not the people he wanted
And
to
then
go
the other
with.
one I think was a painter
Yeah.
that must have some experience.
Yeah, and one of the conditions that I had was to make sure that grant was awarded for, could not be awarded for any materials already purchased or work already in progress. So basically anything that's happening on the property related to porch repair and window repair after tonight is eligible for that $1,000. So they're going to have to itemize their
That was my question. Is,
their
I mean,
bid back.
you give them that, it could be retro on anything. Do you itemize those things to make it, or is it really a big
I think he has
deal?
to document what.
How'd you get to that? Where was I?
It was on the
I can't
documents.
get to it either.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
clear
my
at the
document.
bottom.
So I was
This
hoping
one
he
right
could
here.
be here tonight so we could clearly identify what items
There we
he's
go.
we're specifically paying for as part of this. I mean, I know the work in the previous project that he went through for the porch repair was,
Oh, there it is.
I mean the siding repair was done well, and I did the final on it.
Yeah.
And they are putting an extraordinary amount of work into this house.
It looks like they've stripped it to the core.
Boy, they sure have. Oh, stop it.
And so I
Wonder-
was hoping he'd come here so I could get a little bit of understanding about the preservation background of the contractor he wanted, as well as exactly what is being
They've stripped
proposed.
this thing. There's.
Yeah, they did a great job.
I wonder if they're lead-based certified. 'Cause there's a lot of lead on that bad boy.
Yeah, that's a big job. Just strip that.
So I'd be happy if there's additional conditions the board wants to put on this.
I don't know. You got to reward someone for trying to make it so.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, he did know that painting is not part of
Yeah, it's just the
the
physical
project.
stuff.
It's the physical
Yeah.
things that are the
Yep, yep.
itemized.
Now, does anybody have any issues with it?
No,
I don't.
not even one.
Jonathan, no.
Not even one.
So we could probably make a motion, unless there's questions on it.
I would move to approve PG 1401.
A second.
Okay, then let's vote on it.
Okay, Jonathan Stone,
Yes.
Cindy Toll,
Aye.
Bob Seward,
Aye.
Derek Metzen,
Yes.
Chair McLaughlin.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. So then our next thing is 14-97, Willamette Falls Legacy Project.
Yeah,
So is that you?
that's me. So, as you recall, I've been a couple times in front of the board about the legacy project, and where we are in the process, it's heading to Planning Commission hearings in September, and this is for the request for a rezone from industrial to a new zone called to the Willamette Falls Downtown District, a comprehensive plan map amendment to mixed-use downtown, as well as a master plan approval, which is a framework plan. So it's kind of the big picture guiding document for all future detailed development plans, so when actual development comes in. Along with it, there's also adoption of what we call a multimodal mixed-use area, which is a new designation. I know, multimodal MMA, multimodal mixed-use
Like a video
area.
game.
I know, which is an acknowledgement by the state and ODOT that regional centers, town centers will not be able to grow and fulfill their destiny if all new construction and all new development is triggered for capacity issues in a regional center, which you do know that at PM peak, we do hit our capacity, our volume over capacity ratio. And therefore would make really any new development triggered to mitigate that. In some situations where we are in downtown Oregon City, there is no mitigation. There will be a time at PM peak where we will be over capacity. And what adoption of an MMA area does is it looks at any new development within that boundary and says you're not required to make off-site improvements to mitigate capacity issues during PM peak, but you are required to look at safety measures that may and mitigate for safety. So as part of this rezone and working with ODOT, the property owner in the city is entering into an intergovernmental agreement that identifies 3 off-site improvements to the project. And
Is that him?
No, that's
No.
Bob LaSalle.
yeah,
Somebody else?
and I will. Hello. So I'm gonna open this up. Can everyone see if you open up to the presentation toggle? I'll be going through some maps. So
Okay.
For some reason I can't tab, so hold on.
Oops.
Sorry. So this is once again the property. And I'm going to get to,
Oh, can you go back to that? Well,
Sure.
okay.
I can go back.
I was just trying to look at that aerial satellite one.
Mhm.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
So it strings along 99?
Sure. What it is it is the former Blue Heron paper mill site, which includes a railroad spur line. And so
Oh,
that
gotcha.
is a railroad spur line, which at its widest is probably 20 feet
feet.
wide, and then it goes down to as little as like 8 to 10 feet wide as it
Wow.
hits. And it really finishes off as pretty much as the property is about to enter Kenema.
Mm.
And so as I was explaining, there's looking at 3 off-site improvements. One is some improvements to the tunnel, extra illumination, some advanced signage technology, a new entrance on at the parking lot. So this is not a good map, so I'm going to close it. As well as a new project which will go in front of the Planning Commission at their hearing, which is improvements to Railroad Avenue as it hits 99E. So the reason I'm explaining that is that's what's being requested through the Planning Commission. And as this is a zone change, the Planning Commission will make a recommendation and take the whole package up to the City Commission for approval. So it's called a Type 4 process because it's associated with a zone change and comprehensive plan map amendment.
But we don't have any involvement with
No.
any of it.
You don't. But what I'd like to do is talk a little bit through what was relative to the Historic Review Board, how the design guidelines are set up to look at historic preservation and cultural interpretation as it moves forward. And what I think my request on a staff level is to continue, take off your kind of quasi-judicial hat on and put your policy board hat on. So, you have 2 roles as the Historic Review Board. One is to give advice and consent to the City Commission on matters of historic preservation, and the other is to be the quasi-judicial board for projects that go through based on historic overlay.
That's my question, is once zones change, things engage, the HRB will have to review on all of those buildings, the historic ones?
No. So what I'd like to go through is if you...
Or do you call that, will that end up being Main Street? Will it continue that way into this area?
Right. What, I'm going to open it up. The way this is set up, the master plan, framework master plan, I'm going to go find it for everybody. Framework master plan is, and I apologize. Actually, I have a better document for you. While I'm talking, I'll find this. The goal, I think, for the Historic Review Board over the years is, as new development comes in, they're actually going to be going through the Planning Commission. And all new development was, instead of going through a Type 2 staff review, as usually it's set up where you do a master plan and then subsequent development applications go through a staff level review, we've requested, along with the applicant, to allow all future development applications that have to go back to the Planning Commission through a Type 3. And they've, along with this master plan, there's an adoption of design guidelines. And that's in this packet. I'll walk it through with you. And the goal is for all future development to show how they meet the four core values, and one is cultural and historic interpretation, and they meet the specific design guidelines. What the Historic Review Board can do is provide comment during each development application that the Planning Commission can use. Right now, we're not recommending local designation for any of the structures until such time the property owner understands what they want to do. Now, if we move too quickly and say, okay, the 4 buildings that we're designating for retention, which is Mill O, number 4 paper machine, the D Inc. building, and the Holly building need to be locally designated as a requirement. I think right now we see that as a little bit ahead of the game, with the applicant quite not knowing exactly what they're going to be proposing. So we'd like to wait until designation and actually hopefully work with the property owner to look at National Register nominations for tax credits, which I really think is the way these projects will be able to pencil.
As a group or individually?
They'd be individual. So what the State Historic Preservation Office has identified with the latest determination of eligibility is, as the property went through its demolition with the company that took down all the machineries and pipes, SHPO has identified that it's not eligible as a district anymore because so much of material has been removed. But they have identified 15 structures that are potentially eligible for listing. And what this master plan looked at is said, okay, there's 15 structures that are potentially eligible. Which ones have the highest opportunity for rehab? And along your packet, you'll see a historic resource matrix, and you can look at this later. But you'll see each of the 15 buildings. And actually, about 3 years ago, the city had hired a consultant team to look at the structures, and they had KPFF structural engineers. They had George Kramer, who's a historic preservation consultant out of Southern Oregon, who's been on our team the whole time, and Chris DiLoretto from DiLoretto Architecture, who does adaptive reuse. And they took all 15 buildings and they ranked them on a +3 to a -3 value. And we didn't aggregate the numbers because KPFF, I think their highest number was 0, and there were a lot of +3s for historic preservation consultant. But you could quickly see as you look through these, if you want to go to your presentation, when you see my cursor, you'll see kind of the historic building rating, the structural building rating, and the potential reuse, and you'll see numbers like +3 or +2. Well, that can, once you see that, you can quickly see what buildings rose to the top and what buildings sunk to the bottom. Either that their structural rehab was highly constrained, or maybe their floor plates were really small, or they weren't really highly historic. And so that is where we got the 4 buildings and the Woolen Mill Foundation as regulating for retention. What the other buildings we're seeing is it's really the market that's going to look at the rehab opportunities for these buildings. So we're not saying you need to demolish any of the other buildings. We're saying we're leaving it up to the market to decide if those other buildings can be rehabbed. But what we are requiring as part of the master plan is when they come back for development applications, they need to show how they're are adaptively reusing those 4 structures and the Woolen Mill Foundation. We haven't got to the point where we're requiring local designation and all alterations meeting the Secretary of Interior standards. I think because these structures are so unique and they're really non-habitable buildings that are shells, there's a little worry in kind of putting these structures into a very specific path of just, if you either only meet the Secretary of Interior standards and you only are designated and you're only National Register, or you aren't. We want to promote adaptive reuse that meets the policies, and we think National Register designation and historic rehab is a slam dunk, but there could be a scenario where any of these 4 buildings is adaptive reuse but maybe not meet exactly the Secretary of Interior standards. So we wanted to keep that option open for those 4 buildings, but they have to come back to the Planning Commission and make their case.
Has the adaptive reuse looked at the fact that some of these buildings are in a partial floodplain, and that if they do reuse them, they're probably going to have to do something different with
True,
them?
and actually that's where the local designation comes in.
Yeah.
The way our flood code is, if you are locally designated on the National Register and you are located in the floodplain, and Mill O is an example of one of those buildings, you probably are going to have to you're going to probably have to locally designate it, or that ground floor is going to not be a habitable section and only the second floor will be habitable. So there's, once again, not knowing, we want to leave that open for flexibility. And this whole master plan is trying to create a high bar but build a lot of flexibility into it. So as we move forward, I want to make sure that the Historic Review Board is plugged into these development applications as they move forward, but there may be a scenario where none of them come to you. There may be a scenario where one of them comes to you because they're locally designated on the National Register. But I wanted to give you a heads up that you may have an untraditional kind of connection to the Blue Heron Project, but I think it's always built in that we want your comments
That's
to be
years
through.
down the road.
Could be next year, somewhere between next year and the next 10 years, there'll be
Yeah.
development applications that'll come in.
1 year, 1 decade.
So if you, real briefly, I want to show you, if you look, going into the narrative, there are development code, and once again, the 4 buildings we are saving, just so you can remember, is the D-Inc building, which is a beautiful picture shown here in the 1920s. Number 4, these were done kind of at the same time with beautiful steel sash windows that are all gone. You have the 1918 Mill O, which was an annex to the Oregon City Woolen Mill. That's the really wooden one. Excuse me.
Do you have
That
a
was a pretty
picture?
building.
That one right
And
there.
then you have the Holly building, as well as the Woolen Mill Foundation. So if you scroll down to this picture, here you see, actually this is a good one, here you see the 4 buildings in kind of pink. The Woolen Mill Foundation is in red, but then there's also the secondary elements that are being woven into the master plan policies. And really, we're trying to retain a level of authenticity to the site, because one thing we don't want to do is, if you just keep the 4 buildings and everything else gets demolished, you aren't telling the story. So what are these elements that retention help tell the story? And we've identified right now, they're that Horton sphere, the big sphere at the end of the street, the digester buildings, which has those 4-story riveted digesters, the Flour Mill Foundation from the 1860s under number 2 and 3 paper machine, as well as the boilers that came off Swan Island ships after the war in the 50s. So what we're saying is, this is kind of our clear path to the applicant in the future. So with this master plan, if you retain these structures, you are meeting the intent. Now, however, if there's a scenario where those boilers need to be remediated and they're not staying, then they'll have to come in with an alternative of how they're still keeping enough industrial remnants and elements to be able to keep telling that industrial story.
What about new construction?
And new construction is absolutely permitted and recommended. So,
But will that have to be a board thing?
That will be in front of the Planning Commission.
Okay.
So one thing, if you keep going down, so the way this is set up, I'm going to find the plan policies. Sorry, my computer is slow. Okay. So if you look at the plan policies that will be attached to all lots on this master plan, regardless of who owns it, because the developer who owns it could sell off each lot individually. He could be a master developer, or he could sell the whole site tomorrow. And the way this master plan is set out is that this, in a sense, is a new overlay over the site. So all new development is going to be triggered for this, regardless of who owns it at the time.
Does this master plan sunset at any time?
It's a 20-year master plan.
But the zoning would stay the same.
Correct. The zoning is the Willamette Falls Downtown District, which is, for the most part, the same as our abutting mixed-use downtown, though it does allow some limited light industrial just because of the size of the buildings. And people want to be able to maybe make and sell things there. We want to allow that opportunity, which we don't have in the downtown zone.
Would that allow for creative professionals,
It'll-
similar to what they're doing with inside or inner east side
Yes.
in Portland?
Mhm. Yeah. So light assembly, light manufacturing, fab lab, film, all your professional services, all your creative services, all your traditional mixed use. And I apologize, I don't know why this is. The master plan policies are set out with the 4 core values, and then there's 4 main. Sorry, and I apologize. There we go. So let's say a building comes back, a new building comes back next year. In front of the Planning Commission, they're going to have to meet our traditional site plan design review standards. That's a given, that's a base. Any overlay zones like flood or geologic hazards or Willamette Greenway, as well as these guidelines. And so you have things like enhance the special character of the Willamette Falls Downtown District and celebrate the falls is guideline 1. Guideline 2, design for the comfort and safety of pedestrians. These are traditional urban design conditions. The one I want, maintain downtown character. The one I wanted to identify is guideline 4. I'll bring it up for you. Reuse, rehabilitate, and restore buildings and structures. So they identify those 4 key structures in the Willamette Foundation as well as the other structures. Identifies archaeology. And one thing I'm going to be doing in the staff report is requesting amendments to 2 items of this guideline, so I wanted to let the board know. One is we're going to add an additional sub-item, which is interpretation. So it's any new development that comes in, regardless if it's rehab or a brand new structure, needs to show how they are interpreting the site. And it could be as small as doing an interpretive panel in the lobby, or as big as repurposing and reusing historic materials in the building. So it can be the spectrum depending on, is this a parking garage or is this a new office use. The other thing we're going to be requiring for archaeology is at the time of the new development application, they will be having to turn in an inadvertent discovery plan, as well as most likely they'll be required for monitoring during any site disturbance of native soils, or any time the SHPO has identified a high opportunity for archaeological resources. The site is so unique because there's not a lot of native soil. It's a lot of basalt, but there may be some opportunities based on what they're proposing that have been identified as high opportunities. And during those days where that work happens, most likely there will be archaeological monitoring. And that's not a requirement of our code, but I think that's going back to how is this application meeting those 4 core values of the whole legacy project. So kind of what I see the Historic Review Board doing in these years to come is making comments back to the Planning Commission in any development application, but especially guideline 4. How well have they proposed their adaptive reuse to meet this guideline?
How does that process look like if the application goes to the Planning Commission? Are you going to CC us
Yes.
on that?
So most likely what we'll have is, since the board meets every month and these hearings take about 2 to 3 months to go to a hearing, you'll be like some other advisory boards, you'll have a land use application and you'll provide comments and you'll provide a letter and it'll go into the file and go to the Planning Commission. And if you want to, you can choose to make public comment at the Planning Commission hearing. If there's a special, you collectively either praise or have concern about an issue, you can come and give advice and consent. The one additional item that we want bringing up to the Planning Commission is they're not a design review board. We don't have a design review board in Oregon City for non-historic buildings. So we are recommending as we move forward to either do two things. Have a special ad hoc design review professionals make a report to the Planning Commission. So we would have a committee that met and has kind of provides design review. It would be somebody in the architectural or urban design fields, and it would be more than one person. Or the Planning Commission can choose for these hearings that they may actually have 2 to 3 additional Planning Commission members whenever a Willamette Falls Legacy project comes up and those people have additional design experience. So the conditions of approval kind of left it a little loose because we're not too sure, but the idea is we know that the Planning Commission wants additional urban design and architecture experience as they move forward, and they know they're not a design review commission, but we're too small of a city right now to out of nowhere create a whole separate entity. So we're trying to amend the Planning Commission. And the reason we're doing this is this project will only succeed if the new construction and adaptive reuse are at a level that was going to raise the site. And so what we don't want to see is development that comes in and just barely meets the guidelines. We want to have a robust. So we've tried to create this bar high. We also are investing $30 million into a Riverwalk. So we want to make sure that that money is paying off into quality new development that adds tax increment and jobs to the city too.
And for practical purposes, what is monitoring, archaeological monitoring? What is
It's an archaeologist sitting there watching while you're digging, making a log.
So you have one of those on staff?
No, the applicant would most likely be hiring that out. But that's very common, especially when there's government projects, and that absolutely will happen when there's federal money being used. So the second part I wanted to let you know that right now no federal money has been spent on this project, though we anticipate there will be federal money spent somewhere on the project. And right now it's not owned by a public entity, but at some time there may be parcels owned by public entities, maybe the Riverwalk as a parcel. So we've started this and done the analysis for this whole project through kind of the best practices Section 106 review. And just to give an overview, Section 106 is the process by which there's determined a federal undertaking. So for example, a project might get HUD funding. Well, in order to finalize that HUD funding, you have, for an example, as a federal agency, you have to show either you're having no adverse effect, or you're having an adverse effect on existing or abutting historic resources. So there's a process you go through the State Historic Preservation Office and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation called a Section 106 effect. If there is no adverse effect found, the box is checked and you move forward. If there is an adverse effect found, then you work with SHPO on a memorandum of understanding. It explains the process you went through and the potential mitigation that you would do to mitigate that adverse effect. And mitigation programs can be small and big depending on, is this a window replacement with HUD money for a house, or is this a giant 22-acre rezone? So we've always assumed that there will be an adverse effect. We just assumed that at some point in this process. So we've set up and done all of our inventory and all of our surveying, worked with SHPO, identified the historic sites so we can kind of continue to follow that. So if it does come to a place where there is federal money used and there is a finding because of just a building maybe that's potentially eligible for listing on the National Register, but it's not maybe regulated by us is removed, that may be, or maybe the Riverwalk construction may be removing, once again, one of those buildings that is potentially eligible but it's not regulated. We're moving through that process so we can document our Section 106. So what I'm saying is we're kind of pre-prepared to move through. And we believe we made our Goal 5 findings, which is in the state of Oregon, protection of historic and natural resources. So in a sense, what we've chosen to set by meeting the best practices of Section 106, we believe we are meeting the state requirement to identify and preserve historic resources. We don't own the property now. There's another section called ORS 358, which requires you to kind of follow Section 106 if you own an historic property as a public entity. We do not do that. But if that happens, we'll do that. So it's a little bit of background information of how we came to it. And even though we are not proposing retention of every structure that is designated potentially eligible on site, we think we are meeting all of our statutory requirements, especially since this is not owned by the city and it is a private developer and a private owner that is requesting the rezone technically. What we've done is through the city, through this process, is we've helped with the information that the applicant has presented. We've helped pay for that process this last year, but since it is a quasi-judicial land use application and not what we call a legislative document. So it's a lot of information to you, but what I wanted to do is kind of give you that as a heads up, so as we move forward and people comment to you, you'll understand kind of where we are and why we chose the path we did. And that really is that balancing of flexibility and certainty. The other thing we don't want to do is have two boards, Historic Review Board and the Planning Commission, kind of both having co-review over the same project. We want a clear understanding of what's required. And so we see the Planning Commission through this extra design entity help, along with the Historic Review Board's advice and comment, is kind of the best path forward in the next 10 to 15 years for implementation.
And to clarify, if the HRB has comment that we'd like to make to the Planning Commission, we would do that through instructing you or John being in person presenting. It wouldn't be myself or Bob or whoever going up.
No. Right. Or what you could do is if, so you could do it if you want, if you feel, I'll let the Planning Commission know that I spoke with the Historic Review Board in this August meeting when we move through hearings in September. But after we're talking, as we move forward this fall, if you feel you want to comment formally to the Planning Commission, you can.
Could you have your own special entity, like you were saying, something else that's not this board, not Planning Commission, but when you're talking about urban design with professionals, could you have a dichotomy on a separate board that only deals with this when things come up?
Yeah, I think that's the idea of it's a Planning Commission plus somebody.
Well, but not even that. Not a HRB, not a Planning Commission, but this thing in between that, not the HRB, but this thing recommends to the Planning Commission. And you might have historic people on the board, architects, designers, but that makes that up, and they only deal with this.
Yeah, so exactly that.
But not anything to do with this.
So, but what you can do is over the years can monitor this process. And you feel, if you feel over the years that everything's moving forward and every application you come in, you think meets the identity, meets the goals and concepts, and you may not have any additional comment, or maybe you feel that it's kind of moving outside of what you envisioned and what you saw originally. I'm just saying you always have the ability as the Historic Review Board to provide advice to your elected officials and the other appointed bodies. So you could choose just to keep clapping and say you're doing a great job and we support all the applications that come in, or you could say, we have a real concern about this application for XYZ reason, but then you take that to the Planning Commission.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
As someone who talks to design review boards, I would encourage you maybe to bring in some consultants to the Planning Commission meeting rather than creating a new board for the purposes of review.
Yeah.
Because that's going to happen so irregularly. You're going to have no consistency. I don't see that being executed very successfully. Everyone's going to walk away.
I think we
unhappy.
agree with that, but our conditions are going to allow both to see how that all plays out.
Who knows? Maybe we'll see a huge expansion and there's a need for it in Oregon City.
Only I would love for that to be a case. That we need a design review board because we just have so much great development downtown that we just.
Well, it's great development. What do we need a design review board for?
Well, thank you.
Yeah, so that's a lot of information thrown
Yeah,
at
it
you,
is.
but I wanted to kind of give you that historic lens and why we're doing what we're doing and how because I know people may ask you over this year, and maybe they've already asked you or not, is why, or maybe they assume that future development's going to come to the Historic Review Board, and it may not.
Yeah,
Is really more the heads up I wanted to give you.
that's the case.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a big plate.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Not about this, but on a different topic. Or is there more?
No, I am done with this.
We're
If
done.
anybody
So
has
we
any
break?
questions.
We could break for dinner? Is that what?
Well,
Sounds like
it was
there's
about
a-
the Ermentinger House.
Oh, sure.
It's up in the air.
Yeah, I can-
But last I heard, we didn't have funding.
No, we have fun.
Totally
We're
fine.
fine.
We have total
yeah, we have
funding?
fun. We're fine.
Total houses
Oh.
up there.
Where did the gap come from?
There's a secondary part of funding that came from a community development block grant that was not used by a different entity, and so we are able to take advantage of that. So we have a Schedule A and a weird Schedule B, but
Fantastic.
we are funded. The Ermitinger's in the air. Derek was not here at the last meeting. We made a sweet presentation. We're looking at, for the most part, it being finished by the end of the year.
Perfect.
Yeah, that would be
That's-
great.
Yeah, and I'm once again so pleased with the work that Maya Foti with ARG is doing. She's also the project manager over the construction, the consultants, and so I think is great, as well as Denise Kai and our Parks and Rec department. So I've been very pleased with the work so far, and they'll pour in the foundation now. And we've already confirmed with SHPO that they've identified the items that'll work for the CLG grant, which is, they say, the best is for the foundation repair. So you help pay for the foundation of the Ermitinger House with your CLG vote.
Perfect.
Say, I help that. You can point at it
Okay.
next week.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Let's break.
Yes.
Okay.
The public hearing on agenda item 14-98, HR 14-8, 927th Street. The criteria for approval of a land use action are contained in Chapter 17 of the Oregon City Municipal Code. The proposed development must comply with applicable provisions contained in the City of Oregon City Comprehensive Plan. Generally, unless otherwise noted, if a request is found to be consistent with the municipal code, it is considered consistent with the comprehensive plan. If you wish to participate in this hearing, including challenges for bias or conflict of interest, you must complete the sign-in form located on the table at the front of the room and deliver it to staff. Please do so immediately. The chair will only recognize those who have submitted complete forms. Testimony will be taken in the following order: applicant, testimony in favor, testimony in opposition, rebuttal by applicant. When recognized by the chair, please come forward to the podium, give your name, address, and make your statement. All testimony, arguments, and evidence presented regarding this request must be directed toward the applicable criteria or other criteria in the plan or land use regulation which the person believes to apply to the decision. Please address only the applicable criteria for the decision. Please do not repeat testimony. If you wish, you may choose merely to agree with the previous speaker's statements. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals shall be raised not later than the close of the record at or following the final evidentiary hearing. Such issues shall be raised and accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the Commission and the parties an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision makers and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of persons to participate in the public hearing, either orally or in writing, precludes that person's right of appeal to the City Council or LUBA. Written testimony submitted prior to the hearing constitutes participation in the hearing. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the decision maker to respond to the issues precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony regarding the application. The Commission shall grant such request by continuing the public hearing pursuant to the standards contained in ORS 197.763. Do any of the board members have a conflict of interest or ex parte contact regarding this application?
No.
No.
Who has visited the site?
We have.
Okay, so let's turn over to staff if you're ready.
Yeah, I am. Thank you, Chair McLaughlin. My PowerPoint seems to be
Oh.
freezing on me. Are you seeing?
You see,
You
you
just-
see that?
1408.
Yeah, and I'm clicking on the next slide, and it's not showing on the. One moment. This is very odd.
It had 1407 up there before.
Yeah, but we're 1408. We're allowing
Yeah, for a while it's been that way,
Yeah.
but it started out 1407.
Still won't do it. Okay, I apologize. I'm going to get out of PowerPoint.
Those onions are strong. Yeah, it's still 90 out. Can't be. Yeah.
Looking good.
You got it? Yay. there
Yay,
you go.
okay. Thank you. Yes, Chair McLaughlin. This application is actually coming back to us. This was originally heard as HR 1202. It was for the new construction in the McLaughlin Conservation District of a 3-story commercial building to replace the Olson's Pharmacy building that was taken down after extensive water damage. Like a lot of these projects, this was a kind of a dual track project. You had the Historic Review Board reviewing the architectural and historic appropriateness, as well as simultaneously a Type 2 site plan design review for the development application. The applicant has come back and they're requesting a modification to their original approval to propose a 2-story structure. Once this is reviewed and approved by the Historic Review Board, they're going to move forward and submit their request to modify the site plan and design review, but they've chosen to come in front of the Historic Review Board first. I'll go through the proposed changes, and I wanted to highlight the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association did make comments regarding parking. They did make comments last time regarding parking, and those will be forwarded on to the planning staff that is involved with the site plan and design review. Minimum parking requirements are directed through 1762 site plan and design review and 1752 off-street parking and loading. What the board really is here tonight to look at is how this project meets the design guidelines for new construction and historic appropriateness. So I'll walk through the slideshow. The applicants is here tonight, their representative, and I know they'd be happy to answer any questions. So real briefly, the existing non-designated Olson's Pharmacy is going through a review. That was HR 1202. The Historic Review Board did make a number of conditions of approval, and looking over those conditions of approval and reviewing that to this revised design, a lot of them have been met through the revised design, but there was one condition relating to the C-channels on the connections for the exterior railings. I know HRB member Derek Metzen brought that up at the last meeting for HR 202, so I've kept that in.
There wasn't any detail on that, though.
Right, and so that was the request, is that condition still be met through this round. So real briefly, the abutting historic property, the Church Street house, is a Queen Anne. And what the applicant did last time is they looked at doing a ground floor, I'll move forward, a ground floor commercial building based on streetcar commercial design standards, and the upper stories they designed more of a residential design standard. Initially they looked at more of the vernacular design, though they did modify the design in order to bring in some of those Queen Anne elements. And if you look, these are the revised drawings showing the 2-story, and what you can see here, which was recommended for approval in HR 1202, which is the inclusion of these bay windows on the front elevation, in addition to these Queen Anne elements to better be compatible with the church house. What really has changed, this was all ground floor commercial previously with 2 stories of residential with a little bit of office on the second floor. What the applicant is recommending, I'll show you in the floor plan, is you have a ground floor which is half commercial space, so you see kind of right at the corner of 7th and Monroe, and then the back units will be residential. What you see on the second floor is additional residential units, and this area in the grayed out squares is the break between the 2 buildings, the 2 kind of design, and that these are outdoor patios. So if you look at the 3D is a great way of looking at it. You'll see this break right here. You can see that in those second story floor plans. where you see these outdoor areas. And the site plan design review requirements, and I think also the multifamily design standards, want to see that these second-story massing is broken up into historically appropriate kind of blocks. So while this building is quite big, they've tried to break these individual units into sections that are not overwhelming. So they have that kind of break of that open space on the second floor. I just wanted to show you here, this is a massing exercise to show below is the 3-story concept that was approved, and this is the 2-story concept. What they did not change in this massing study was the redesign to bring the bay windows in. So you see the old version which had front balconies, and that is not part of the revised drawings. But this was just more of a massing study, so you can see the difference. So you can see here. And then what has changed is you have at the alley, in the back between the alley and the parking lot, you do have residential units right here, whereas before this was a commercial area. So I'll move forward. So really the only recommended condition that came from the last application that has not already been fulfilled is that C-channel railings not being allowed or exposed fasteners be minimized. So I kept that in. I don't have any specific additional conditions of approval related to this, and so what the board does tonight, they can apply additional conditions of approval they think are needed or move forward as proposed.
But what I read was on the commercial they had 14-foot ceilings and they're asking for 10.
True. And so the board, if they approve this, they can support the findings of staff to recommend to allow the 10-foot ceiling as a way to reduce the overall mass of the structure.
Sure.
And you can do that in your motion.
Does anybody have any questions for staff?
So what is the intent to reduce the mass of the structure?
Building code, site plan design review has a requirement that new construction ground floor should be 14 feet. And that was a goal, I think. This is myself editorializing, so take it what it is. But I think it was a goal, especially downtown, to make sure that we had, if there was residential uses or commercial uses in downtown areas and along the commercial corridor, that they weren't custom built so they couldn't have new uses over time. And so 14 feet was kind of seen as kind of the minimum way to make sure that it had a long life of many, many, many different tenants. What we've come to realize, kind of especially along the 7th Street corridor, and this came with Mike's drive-in as well, and this came with the last version, is that oftentimes in the historic corridor, requiring the 14-foot height limit, you end up you end up having a building that oftentimes has a massing compatibility question. So oftentimes if you see the reduction in the height of the ground floor, it often helps mitigate the overall mass of the structure relating to the neighboring historic buildings. Now in this situation, that made a lot of sense when it was a 3-story building. Now that it's gone to 2 stories, I think it's still somewhat relevant, and I think if the board wants to, they can support it. This is a good example. This is where you look at the bottom of that, you'll see the new construction related to the church house. Now luckily the church house is set up and it has kind of an exposed basement, but you'll really see even a 10-foot ceiling, anything much taller, you start to really get out of scale from the church house.
Well, especially with the slope of the street.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, planning staff can make secondary findings with regard to the 14-foot height. It's not your requirement. But in some situations where you think that reduction is aiding the compatibility of the building to the historic district, it does give planning staff additional findings that they can use. But if you do not believe it is relevant either way, then that's good to know too.
Roger.
What was the style of the building that was here before?
It was a 1940s structure.
Okay.
It was a box with like a barrel roof on it.
Oh, okay.
Anybody, anything else? Okay, well, if the applicant can come forward and state your name and address and make your pitch.
My name is Joe Van Lum, architect with Architects Van Lum Group, and next to me is Tom Loris, architect, also works with me and has worked with me on this particular project. We were involved in this ever since this project started, ever since they had the problem with the water and that damaged the building, and they basically had to tear it down. And as you can see, it's been kind of that way over the last few years, primarily because of financial kind of conditions, and also there was a tenant, another pharmacist that was going to come in and take actually 2 floors and build his business from that point, but that didn't work out, so the owner went back and to the original design, and so except for the fact that instead of it being a 3-story building, it's a 2-story building. We were in favor of that because of the compatibility of that to the neighborhood. It's a better fit for the neighborhood than the 3-story building was. And last time we went through design review or through the historic review, there was a lot of comment about how it dwarfed the building next door, the church apartments, and kind of blocked the view from as you come down the hill. So as you can see, it makes a big difference now because the building fits into the neighborhood for sure, but it does give a lot more exposure to the Queen Anne church house, which we think is a good idea. So if you see, and as a matter of fact, there's some handouts. I think would you pass those out? That's really comparing those two, like what you saw on the screen. And you can really see the difference between the two, how they compare with the church house for one, and how the overall profile of that new building fits in a lot better with the buildings around that area.
So really what precipitated is just cost and able to build it.
Cost was a big factor, absolutely, because it made a big difference on
Sure.
cutting out the 1 floor. Basically, it took the middle floor out of the building and just dropped the 3rd floor to the
Right.
2nd floor. And the benefit of that was that I thought that the design was kind of unique in that with the split roof line that we put on here, it already made it a residential scale type building instead of just having 1 pitch that covered the entire building. So I thought that was a good move. And it also related very closely to what's happening with the church building. So,
Sure.
thought that was a good match, all things considered.
I can't see it here, but I'm just curious, what's the pitch on the front? I can't.
That's an interesting question. The pitch, it was 812, and when we did this building, we tried to keep it fairly low by making it an 812 pitch. We started the project and decided that that 14-foot height was just too much to deal with because it raised the building also. So we took that before the city, and they said, okay, you can cut that down. And our agreement was that in order to exchange that, we either put that back in there, the floor-to-floor height, or we changed the pitch of the roof to match the adjoining
So it's
church.
8. It's 8 is
So it'll be 10 to 12.
10,
Yeah,
12.
the
It
new
will
design is 10-12.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exact-
It's just so fuzzy I can't
Yeah.
read it. Sorry.
It is.
Kind of see it on that one.
Oh, 10, 12. Gotcha.
So it's more closely related to the project next door.
Sure.
The other requirements, as far as the design review requirements, are exactly what they were before. We haven't changed those. We did make some changes on the building that were recommendations the last time. For instance, the angled entryway at the front of the building that faces onto McLaughlin or Monroe and 7th Street, and added the windows to match those in the church house, so that those two were kind of sister ships. Otherwise, it's the same as it was before.
Sure. Does anybody have questions?
So the decision to, I appreciate the decision to break up, and I don't want to rehash old conversations necessarily, but to break it up into sort of almost like two separate structures, the front mass and then the back mass. And, you know, so from the side elevation, the Monroe Avenue elevation, the scale of the front mass really seems appropriate for the other structures that are on 7th Street. But I guess I'm curious, you know, if you had the opportunity to sort of break them apart, and then, you know, why you stuck with the Queen Anne style for the whole structure.
Why did we do that?
Yeah, why did you stick with the Queen Anne style for the whole structure? You know, or could you have thought about it as like two separate buildings in a way?
I suppose we could have done that. I didn't think that was appropriate. I think there's one statement in there that your building should look the same from the back side as the front side, basically, and so we tried to keep it as uniform as we could all the way around so that it was one building instead of a couple of buildings put together.
I have a question about the balconies and the what was alluded to in the last approval.
Connections.
Yes, is that
Right. Those are all going to be hidden connections. That was a big point made last time, and
Okay.
we've got that.
Okay, good.
Okay. Are you guys good? Okay. Thank you.
The questions?
No, I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I have testimony in favor and testimony in opposition, but all I have is one comment. Denise McGriff.
Good evening. Denise McGriff here on behalf of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, and we did review the revisions to the previous Historic Review Board application. I will say, in summary, that that was one of the big concerns of the neighborhood, as Joe pointed out, that we felt that the three-story structure was really overwhelming to the church house and that it should have a little more precedent. With the two-story addition, dropping it one story, it makes a lot of difference. I will have to say just on the cuff here that we would not have any objection to lowering the floor height of the retail from 14 to 10. Again, as staff stated, that really is a design standard that's being looked at for downtown. This is not downtown. It's a little bit different. And I think to keep things more in scale with the other commercial buildings and also the other historic commercial structures that are on the street, I think it's appropriate to reduce that to 10. I think the only thing that we had some concern about was that it was voted that we would recommend approval to you of the two-story addition. We like a lot of the changes that were made. We only had one comment about the stucco, that's not a material that you would commonly find on 7th. That's really about it. Otherwise, we support it.
Okay. Thank you. Did you want to make a rebuttal to that? Any comment? You'd have to come forward if you want to. Sure.
I think that's a good point about the stucco. We wanted to have some material that was going to last all the way around the building, and we had two existing buildings that were concrete walls, and that was the logical choice to put on the walls instead of just leave it bare concrete. We were going to cover it with a textured material, and stucco was a good opportunity.
Did you ever think about a brick veneer?
Sure. You mean
costlier,
thin
I
brick
guess.
kind of?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. We did.
There's a thin brick wainscot on there now.
Down below.
Down below.
Yeah. But this
That's only as a base.
Like the
That's
water
what we're going to
table.
put on there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just larger.
Sure.
So none of the Queen Anne buildings in the district have stucco on them currently?
Well, you've got to think about commercial buildings historically, not so much residential.
Sure.
stucco was very predominant on buildings.
Yeah,
But-
there's several of them in Oregon City. In fact, the addition to the church has it.
Yeah, or a lot of buildings that were brick masonry or something would have some sort of a skim coat, whether that was stucco or a skim.
It was a stucco
Yeah,
material. And we're kind of doing the same thing, but it's a regular stucco thickness because there are a lot
it
of
gonna
cracks
be-
in the back wall. We want
Yeah.
to get rid of all that.
But
and
will it be like
clean
a
up.
kind of a rough stucco, or is it going to be like a smooth coat sort of stucco?
Kind of in between,
Yeah.
a little more than eggshell.
Okay.
you know.
Is it genuine stucco?
Yes, as opposed to drive it.
Mhm.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's long gone. Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Does anybody on the board have questions for staff?
Can you just clarify that the comment about the style on the front versus style on the side?
Yeah, that was a conversation we pulled back on. I think that has, not in our district, but in other historic districts, that's been a way to take a very large new construction and break up massing. I think my personal opinion in this situation is I don't know if we have that big of a massing anymore. And I think the goal was to make sure that when that did happen, that they are really seen as kind of distinct buildings. And I think at this proposal, it never felt that if you went with Queen Anne at the front and bungalow at the back or vernacular at the back, because you had that continuous ground floor commercial that wasn't interrupted. Personally, I think that it makes it a little too busy. But I think with in situations I've seen where you can kind of, it's maybe one building, but as you take it down to the ground, you have different architectural styles, but they're actually the same building. That's been an approach before, but I think that's not what the applicant proposed. And we never really felt that changing the second and third floor 2 years ago to have a different architectural style in the back necessarily added to any mitigation of breaking up the massing any more than what it was. And I think in this situation with two-story, I don't know with having a front one style and a back the other style, if that necessarily is meeting a cause of breaking up the
I think
massing.
what happens is it ends up fighting each other, and you've got pretty good consistency on a building like this.
Consistency, yes. I mean, this is just, I'm struggling to sort of see the scale in terms of maybe if you chopped them apart, but I mean, it's not. It doesn't affect my thinking. I was just curious because
Yeah.
That's a good point. It's a
Yeah.
good question.
playing architect for myself, what I could imagine is just that because the bridge between the two masses is also that sort of continues that style, that it reads as kind of like one building, sort of, and that while you've broken up the massing, but at the same time you're extruding the roof line back from the front all the way to the back, that if you had sort of thought about the Monroe elevation as a separate entity, that you may have made a few different design decisions, and I just wasn't sure if it was something in the design guidelines that maybe influenced.
No, I think what Mr. Van Loon was referencing was in site plan design review to make sure that all four elevations of buildings have the same quality. And so we don't have a three-sided building that you forget to design the fourth side. So the level of quality materials. This is, for a lot of these, it's, we're responding to what the applicant proposes, and then we're recommending mitigation items or redesign items when we feel that the applicant has not proposed something that meets our standards. And so I think what came at is I felt that that was the approach they chose. I mean, I think what you propose is another approach, but I don't know if it's really tonight is what they're proposing meets the standards for new construction rather than an alternate approach that may also meet the standard. And I think a good example is that when this board looked at the addition to the Atkinson Memorial Church, and that was a perfect example of there could be many ways to provide an addition, and what the board was looking at was the one the applicant proposed. And so and I think what a lot of the neighbors commented, they had other additions that they had in their mind. And so on our end, I think as a board member is, if you do not feel that what the applicants proposed does meet the design guidelines, are there conditions of approval or mitigation measures that you can add to make the project more compatible with the design guidelines? As that rather than here's an alternate way of looking at it, but that's not what the applicant pursued, I guess.
Yeah.
That was a roundabout way of answering that question.
No, I get it.
Well, is there any other questions for staff? Okay, then I'll close the public hearing. Does anybody want to make comments on anything as a board?
I actually think it looks better than before.
Yeah, it's an improvement. I think I would agree with the conditions with if someone wanted to make a motion on it with the added conditions of the ceiling height on the first floor and then,
that can just be a motion supporting.
Okay.
Doesn't have to be a condition.
But the one with the handrail.
Yeah, that's
a staff.
That's already in the
That's in
conditions
there.
as
So we could just someone can make a
as
motion to
recommended by
pass
staff.
this.
With the extra motion supporting the reduction of the
Yeah.
height.
You need two motions.
Just
Do one motion.
one
push
motion
together.
and yeah. Somebody want to do that?
Sure, is this a motion for the 10 feet, or is this a motion for the whole?
The
It's
whole
a
thing.
motion to adopt.
Okay.
With the
Yeah.
stipulation that
Both.
Anyone?
All right, so I move that we approve the plan for HR 1408 as presented with recommendations that the city approve the 10-foot ceiling.
Someone second it? Okay, you put it to a vote?
Jonathan Stone,
Aye.
Cindy Toll,
Aye.
Bob Seawork,
Aye.
John McLaughlin,
Aye.
and Derek Metzen has recused himself, or has left the meeting early.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, regarding HR 1407, do any of the board members have a conflict of interest or ex parte contact regarding this application?
No.
No.
I don't know if it even is pertinent, but other than knowing Denise for probably 15 years, probably 5 years ago, you asked me to bid on your garage, and that was a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. And though she asked me to hold on to that bid for many years, it kind of really didn't matter. So that's what I wouldn't have any type of conflict that I can see. Has everyone visited the site or been by it? Okay. All right. So if we can turn it over to staff.
Yep. This is a pretty simple project tonight. I love these. Ms. McGriff's garage has been severely constricted by the cedar tree behind it, and she's moving forward to remove the garage and replace it with pretty much the exact same garage. And the key thing is the location of the existing garage does not meet the underlying zone's 3-foot setback from the side yard. And so the applicant is also simultaneously requesting the historic preservation incentive to reduce setbacks, and it's really to reduce the setback to the existing location of 0.83 feet from the property line. And so the building really wasn't in a place for her to repair, and we do have a policy requirement that says you can repair a structure if you keep half the roof up and 2 walls up at any one time, and that just really seemed very cumbersome for this project, and it made sense to actually go through with a new construction and a request for the preservation incentive to replace the structure in the same location. So this is not considered a repair, it's a new construction with the preservation incentive. And so this shows the existing garage and the proposed garage. She has some new additional architectural elements and some taking the medallion that's on the main house and putting it on the garage, of course using all historically appropriate materials. This is a view of the garage today. And I have very traditional conditions of approval, which I'm sure Ms. McGriff will meet. That is all I have. The McLaughlin Neighbors Association did present their comments that did not get in as part of this application, and I wanted to give that to you on your, and a representative from the McLaughlin Neighbors Association is here tonight, so this will be Exhibit 1 entered into the record tonight as their comments. So I wanted to give that to you.
I'm assuming the tree is a casualty.
Tree is a casualty.
Oh, I was still reading.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll go back, I promise. Okay.
Forgot that speed reading class.
It's just the last line. Okay.
Oh,
Way to go. Okay, is that it that you have? Does anybody have any questions right now? Okay, if the applicant would come forward and state your name and address.
Denise McGriff, resident of Oregon City, and the applicant. I think Christina summed it up very succinctly. I did go through a process to see if the garage could be reconstructed and keeping up 2 sides. After it was cleaned out, we found that almost all the bolts that are holding the garage to the foundation are rusted, and a couple of them are not there, just the part of it's still kind of standing. And the foundation cement is basically spalding. It's just coming off. In addition, the other thing that we actually need to also correct in addition to the crushing issue is that when Mrs. Preston constructed the garage many years ago, she put the foundation of the garage on top of the existing driveway. So we have a situation where the 2 foundations meet, and that's where water infiltrates the garage. So that was not a happy discovery after several years of it being in that location, finally figuring out that that was where the water was coming from. Many of you are probably aware that I am very much in favor of trees, and so it's taken me 10 years to discuss this with my spouse, that the tree is going to have to go. I don't want to do it, but it is severely crushing the garage. If you were to come by, you would get a little vertigo looking at the angle that it's at now. It's not unsafe, but it's just slanting the wrong way. So think of a rectangle and it's doing this. It's just tweaking the whole thing. Probably the only other element that is not visible from the street is that going into the back area of the house there is a small step made out of basalt that the tree root is also infiltrating. So it will I'll have to destroy that, and then I've already talked with a contractor at Pioneer Waterproofing about repairing it back to its original. I'll have to remove it to get the tree root to have the stump ground. So if any of you would like a little bit of free cedar, I will let you know. I will have it in my driveway. And
make shingles.
Well, that's somebody suggested that, and my house did have cedar shingles on it.
So are you trying to replicate what was there back in the 40s?
Yes, because as I mentioned in my report, the original garage is in the alley behind my house, which is no longer a part of my property. It was subdivided, we think, and lot line adjusted, and it's a very small one-story garage with a single car door, and it has a curved roof.
Oh.
There are no real architectural features to it, but it was a part of the lot at one time.
Can you go to that historic photo of the house with the garage?
Yeah, you can't see the garage because again, it's
This is the.
that's the 40s.
No, I want
the 40s garage.
I want
yeah.
the old picture,
Oh yeah, hold on a
the
second.
black and white.
Yeah, the original garage, like I said, is in the alley adjacent to Center Street. There's an alley that runs through my property, and that's how they accessed the property. They put the car in the garage, and then came up some steps through the back of the property.
So you're gonna have to dig out and re-pour the foundation and the driveway?
I am so sure of it, at least the pad part. It's, try to describe it, it's very rinky-dink. In order
Right
to
there.
keep water out of the front of the garage, they put well, it's kind of like a speed hump. So if I drive into the driveway,
Water
drive
barrier.
in, and I have to go like this to get over it to get onto the flat. That was where those two pieces of driveway. At one time, the driveway was underneath, the garage was underneath the house, but that was after the cartilages
They
were
closed
there.
it off. So are you you're not gonna put the
Railing around the top?
the railing?
No.
And is that a porte-cochere between the house and the?
No, that's the original pergola that was on the house. Did I include the picture from 1913? Anyway, there's a photo in the file from 1913, and there is no garage there, and that's all that's there on the side is the pergola. And my husband rebuilt it for me when I was here last before the Historic Review Board many years ago.
So you can walk into an entryway through that pergola to get to your basement?
No, there's a right where, Christine, if you move that
There's
little
just a space
thingy down,
between the house and the garage.
the pergola
There's no
sits on a
orange.
little rock wall that was built there, and there's a square block in it, and the pergola sits in that and then attaches to the house.
Okay.
So why are you sticking with a flat roof? Why not
Oh,
a
that
gable to
tree. Oh, my God.
match your house?
Setbacks?
What?
You could still do a gable.
I
You just can't cross the property
property line.
Right, it could go flat.
Yeah,
You could
I
go flat right
looked
to the
at
wall.
that initially as a design, and I just did not like the way that it looked. It just looked weird.
And you don't like
Well,
that
not
you
only
have a deck
that,
up there?
you would take away the
We
view
don't
from
have a
those
deck up
windows,
there.
wouldn't it? Wouldn't it block-
Basically,
Not
the
really.
flat roof serves as a repository for all the cedar
No,
droppings.
but I mean,
Steel
wouldn't it-
needles
wouldn't
and
it-
everything,
If
yeah.
you did a gable, wouldn't it block your view from those windows?
Not too much. It would be
No,
a fairly
no.
low-pitched roof.
No, they're both, those windows on the side, those are both bedroom windows. What I talked to my designer about was proposing to bring the parapet up just a little bit to cover that roof area, and I think that shows on
Here,
the plan.
you go to
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
here. You can see right there.
Yeah, so that would kind of disguise that flat roof and give it a little more dimension and not make it look
Some depth.
quite so,
Flat.
yeah. But we had, used to be a gutter back there, and the tree is completely crushed it, so we're going to try to put the
Yeah,
gutter.
you need that gutter for the
Yeah,
rain.
yeah, we do need it. Right now, it just kind of rolls off the back of the roof
Well, at
into
least it does that.
to the compost pile, which is back there.
Oh. Gotcha.
This is the proposed garage you're looking at.
Sir, what is the material?
It's the same material that's on it now, which will be California drop siding.
It's a teardrop sort of looking.
Yeah, I think I included a profile of
Yeah.
it in my
I think it's the last
report.
page or close to the windows or the
Yeah.
lights.
It's the same that's on the house. It's all, but at least she did that. And I really like her old garage doors, but they don't quite fit the bungalow style that I was trying to kind of make it match the house a little more.
And that's
Well,
the
nothing
medallion
about
I was
nothing
talking
What
about
is
the
that?
garage is
That's
a
the
bungalow
medallion.
style.
Yeah.
Well,
It's not
But
what
if you
the
can get some
house-
elements on there,
Yeah,
to,
what Mrs. Preston was trying to do with this picture is she basically
Right there.
wanted the house to be a colonial-style house. That's why it was painted white in the 40s and had green shutters. And everything about it, including the lighting, inside and outside, was all colonial, so you thought you might be in Williamsburg of some sort.
But see, that's the amazing thing what color can do to a style. Okay. Does anybody have any other questions? No?
You can actually see the colonial fixture on the garage in the 48. That was gone by the time I bought the house.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you. I don't have anybody talking anymore about it, so does anybody have any questions for staff?
Yes, you do have one more.
I don't.
You do? Oh,
Yeah, I gave
it's my problem.
I didn't get in trouble. Well, Denise, you already
Denise
spoke.
has already been here.
Yeah. Rich, is it Wilhelm? Wilhelm? Wilhelmy. Okay, go ahead and state your name, obviously correctly, and your address.
Rich Wilhelmy, 812 John Adams. I'm a co-land use chair of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association. And for the record, I think most everyone knows Denise is chair of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association. So for this portion of the steering committee meeting on August 6th, she turned the gavel over to Vice Chair Gordon Wilson. Again, we met on August 6th, and Denise presented her plans and sort of went over the whole story of decolonializing the house and making it look more like a bungalow. We were pretty unanimous in the overall look of it, trying to make it look more like the house and less like a colonial garage. It's a little challenging in that the garage has been a couple different places over the years, but the elements we felt that that we liked were the siding and the trim, the light sconces, and then especially the garage door, if it's more in bungalow style, matching the house. We were all in improvement of that. And she also stated her neighbor, and I think this is a separate submittal, just to the north, is in approval of it too.
I guess that is north.
And so, pretty much based on that, the steering committee voted unanimously to approve the project.
Great. Thank you.
My directions are off. That seems like it's east, but
Remember, the whole McLaughlin neighborhood is
it's tweaked.
tweaked.
Okay, thank you. Well, then I'm going to close the public hearing, and we can talk amongst ourselves.
Okay.
Anybody have any questions, issues?
I have no issues.
Good plan.
It's going to look good.
0.83 feet is probably like 10 inches from the property line or something like that.
Well, that's where it's sitting now.
Yeah, I mean, it was 0.83. I was trying to figure out what that was in inches.
9.6 plus
Yeah.
a little.
So, was there any issues from? No, I can't talk to you. Okay. Any other questions? Any comments among us? Anybody? Anything?
That's good.
Okay.
I move we approve HR 1407.
Anybody
Conditioned.
second?
Sorry.
As conditioned.
Ask.
As conditioned.
Anybody want to second that?
Second.
Okay. Can we put a vote?
Jonathan Stone.
Aye.
Bob Seward.
I
Cindy Toll.
Aye.
Chair McLaughlin.
Aye.
Motion carries.
You tried to
Okay.
trick me. You went and put me second. That's not fair.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. What else?
Oh, I wanted to give a quick update about the library. The library team was planning to come this month to make a design advice presentation. They just weren't quite ready after meeting with the Neighbors Association, and they hope to be back next month.
I bet. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for all your help, and we are adjourned.
5 minutes to office, I just came from
I know how that